Hey, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to the weekend. It is a Saturday out here, January 18th, 2025, 11:23 a.m. That's California time. Latest activity here on the Earthquake 3D globe shows a little 1.1 into the Southern California area. Notice today, though, we got some further escalation of earthquake activity here across this region of just outside of Taiwan, southwest of the Nankai Trough area. USGS reporting 4 earthquakes, a 4.6 and a 5-pointer, the most recent quake there. But I have seen a number come in the last couple hours here of another 4-pointer or so, maybe even a couple more in this area just outside of Taiwan to the southwest here of the Okinawa, Japan region. Pretty much considered Japan here, right? Just northeast of this area of Japan. But it is in a location that has seen quite a bit of earthquake activity here recently, and more so last year, with some decent sized earthquake activity and even some decent swarming going on out here back in April of last year. Remember that we're getting quite a few 5s and 6s just popping up out of the blue. This area has seen a return of earthquake activity across the region. That's going to be there's even a 4.9, another 4.9 coming into the seismograph stations there. Maybe this was the one that looks like that came in about half an hour or so ago. But it is in an area that we need to keep an eye on, because this means there's pressure being applied out here across the northwestern edge here of the Philippines plate. That in itself can see some big earthquakes. The area of interest that we're talking about right now sits right down here where we're seeing that current ongoing earthquake activity. But there's a section up here called the Nankai Trough around the mainland area of Japan that is overdue for some large megaquake activity. And it's an area that got a megaquake warning put on it here recently by the Japanese Meteorological Agency because of all the elevated activity around the region. And, a lot of time has passed since we've seen any decent earthquake activity. The general strain out here against the area of Japan and Taiwan is a good one. It's a big one, right? You got a lot of reinforcing plates adding that major collision and subduction, so to speak, across the areas. It doesn't take hundreds and hundreds of years to build up strain in these areas. That's why we're always seeing earthquake activity out here. Look at the general direction of the arrows here. They're all pointing down to this area. I kind of like to call that the crunch zone. Pretty much anywhere out here across the western areas of the Pacific Plate, Indonesia Islands region, Philippines. It is the crunch zone compared to other areas out here around the globe. All the plates tend to move off in that general direction here and meet around these areas. The Nankai Trough over here is an interesting area because of its reoccurrence cycle in fractures out here in different sections, so to speak, with the last section being A and B with a magnitude 8.0. That's going to be the western segment here of the Nankai Trough. And again, that's going to sit right, let me show you guys, bring back the USGS map. It's going to be this area right here near the Kumano Ridge, Nankai Trough, right here along the plate boundary. It's a major area, a couple different segments there that rupture, with the last one being 1946. So not quite 100 years yet for A and B. Same for C and D. Back in 1944, C and D ruptured first with an M7.9, and then a couple years later, A and B with an M8 pointer. But they do come in sequences there. As we've seen back in 1854, December 23rd and December 24th. Start off with an 8.4 for C, D, and E. That's the eastern segments here. And then one day later, A and B popped with an M8.4. So, and that, if you go back and look at historical data, it tends to rupture in sequences there. If you got one segment producing a big earthquake, you can almost be certain within a short time period of the other segment going as well with a similar or even larger magnitude. Now, Section E has not seen any rupture since 1854. So we are missing this area back here. It didn't rupture back in 1944. So there's quite a bit of strain still across this region. And more than likely, we would see E rupture first, or maybe even this segment CD and E rupture due to the lack of stress release back in 1944 from CD, A, and B without E rupturing. That last rupture was back in 1854. So obviously that's been over 100 years, a lot of time passed there. So continue to keep an eye on that. There's obviously a lot of strain that's being put on this area here, the Nankai Trough recently. All last year there was a lot of earthquake activity down here. More recently we've seen earthquake activity centered over here across the western edge of that Nankai Trough with a series of large earthquakes. And this is just in the last 30 days, 6.8, bunch of 5s and 4s in there. And no telling how many earthquakes there under that magnitude. No adjustment there across the Nankai Trough here. We've seen a number of deep earthquakes underneath the area. Let me check this area real quick for deeper activity. We're going to go 5.0, and I want to go back last year. We're just going to go back to the last couple years and take a look at this area in terms of... Jeez, hold on a second. Okay. That's actually my ringtone, the emergency broadcast system there. Kind of neat. It does freak people out, though, when I'm in the store and that thing goes off. Pretty crazy. All right. Yeah, the Nankai Trough right about here. I want to cover some of the deeper regions as well up north. And we'll take a look here and see what we have. 13 earthquakes. A lot prior to this area. Really only, there was one here, 5-pointer, back last year, 249 kilometers deep. That's right into the subduction zone. And another one, super deep, back in 2023, 410 kilometers for a 5-pointer. 6.3, 32 kilometers deep. So this area, really no sufficient release of energy, obviously, in the last couple years. But these deeper quakes, obviously a good indicator of the strain building up here across the locked area, so to speak. And that's the Nankai Trough region where we can see some big-time earthquakes, even up to a magnitude 9 if we get all these rupturing at once. So continue to keep an eye on that area specifically just because of all the activity here recently. And today we got that swarm going on here further down the line. This is an entire major subduction zone area, different regions. But it's pretty active out there right now. Some 4s and even some 5s out there. It's a hot spot today for sure of earthquake activity. Some further movement out across the Nepal area as well, just north of Nepal, north of the Mount Everest region. This is where they had that 7-pointer out here. 7.3, right? Let's see if that was right. Oh, 7.1, excuse me. So far, the largest earthquake of 2025. I think once we get towards the end of the month, we'll do a little comparison for this year's events compared to last year at this time. I do like to compare earthquakes. Last year in general, we've already checked that out here in a video recently. Last year's earthquakes were significantly lower in terms of the multitude counts compared to the previous year. I think it was about 1,500 earthquakes of magnitude 4.5 and above, less for 2024 than what we had seen in 2023. So it may have seemed like a lot of earthquake activity was happening last year. I've noticed, it's been a social media explosion here recently. Weather pages are reporting earthquakes. Sports pages are reporting earthquakes. It's like, so of course, for people that normally don't follow earthquakes, it may seem like, wow, what's going on here? Now we got sports pages reporting these earthquakes. Might seem like a lot of earthquake activity is occurring, but it's really not. 2024 was a fairly low year. We'll see what happens here in 2025. We're still expecting an 8-pointer, and I say that because Well, we should have seen one by now. They're pretty common. If not every year, every other year, and we haven't had one. We haven't had an 8.0 earthquake or above since 2021. All right, let's go ahead and check out California. Always having earthquakes out here, right? I was reading somewhere out there on the one of these social media pages. California hit with 4th earthquake today. Well, hate to break it to you, but there's always more than 4 earthquakes hitting California out here. It could be the magnitudes that they're looking at. They're obviously a little bit more than 4, even on the 2.5 map. But in general, on any given day, we see upwards of 100 or even more than 100 earthquakes here across California on any given day. Today, in the last 24 hours, 115 earthquakes. That's a lot of activity, huh? Not really. It sits along a major plate boundary, and most of these earthquakes are too small to be felt, but they are being picked up. Just goes to show you that the plates are always in motion out here. And, obviously they build up strain in certain areas that are not releasing earthquakes. That's why I always say when things are elevated out here, that's the time to be on guard, because that's when things are moving out here. When things are moving, they're not relieving strain unless you get these big earthquakes that sufficiently relieve the strain that's been built up there for hundreds of years. These little quakes do absolutely nothing. It just tells me right there that things are on the move. And they are. They're definitely on the move here in the last 24 hours. Northern California specifically up here. This is the region that had a 7-pointer back in early December last year, 2024. But, call them aftershock sequences, whatever. It's still a lot of earthquake activity here on a broader scale sense, indicating the complexity of this tectonic region here. You got the Pacific Plate to the south, North American Plate here, roughly the Cascadia subduction zone eastward. The Gorda Plate that's being subducted underneath the southern end here of the Cascadia megathrust zone. And it's just a lot of activity stirring up here recently. And just not confined to the 7-pointer area. That was actually right about here. We've seen a lot of activity further south along the plate boundary, northern edge of the San Andreas Fault. A lot up here across the southern end of the Cascadia subduction zone as well in the last couple months. So things are, still quite amplified. Let's take a look here in the last 24 hours. The latest going to be a 3.0. That's the largest magnitude. Latest so far this morning. I'm surprised they're reporting that, though. 1.4. That's good. I think they've been watching some of my update videos here. In fact, I know they have. But they are including some of the smaller quakes now that are being picked up on these seismograph stations. 1.4 the latest. Prior to that, 2.9 back away from this area along the plate boundary, along the Gorda escarpment region. So a whole bunch of dynamic activity occurring within this zone. Still quite possible we could see a partial rupture of the Cascadia subduction zone here, just the southern end. That tends to happen more frequently than an entire unzip here of the Cascadia, which would result in a 9.0 or greater. The southern end here capable of producing easily a lower 8, even a mid 8, depending on how far up north it ruptures. That 7-pointer that struck back in Northern California here last month was off of the plate boundary, not really associated here with the Cascadia subduction zone, though, even though we noticed a little bit of escalated earthquake activity into that zone. So that's why I say it's still quite a sensitive area in terms of earthquake potential here. 10 earthquakes, with the largest being a 3-pointer here from yesterday across that area of Northern California. Pacific Northwest, it is the weekend, so these little quakes are not going to show up there on the map until Monday morning after they add them. The Bay Area, fairly quiet aside from the Clear Lake volcanic field. That's just hydrothermal plants out there. A lot of earthquake activity being induced by the operations that are performed out there. Nothing to do with a specific, well, it's got something to do with the volcano. Obviously, this heated areas below the Clear Lake volcanic field, but the resulting earthquakes are not due to volcanic activity. Latest quake here, a 1.0. That's off the San Andreas Fault in a region that's seen a little bit of escalated earthquake activity here recently, with some twos, a bunch of twos, and some ones out here in the last week. That's the area that close to the region where the 1906 earthquake struck, the 7.9. Little sequence of events here off the San Andreas, or on the San Andreas Fault near the creeping segment. They call this the creeping section because this is you can pretty much tell when the plates are on the move, because we see these little small earthquakes really not locking up and resulting in, this plate boundary really doesn't lock up and result in large earthquake activity compared to areas north and south of here. This is just kind of a creeping area. That's why they call it the creeping section, because when the plates are on the move, we get these small resulting earthquakes as the two plates slide past each other easily, instead of locking up, hundreds of years and resulting in an 8.1 or so. So we know the plates are on the move when we see the creeping segment start showing some activity, and it is today. It's on the move. So obviously we've seen elevated activity up north. Down south here in Southern California, we got one earthquake here. That's within the locked area towards the southern end of the San Andreas Fault here. A couple smaller quakes, a 1.4 and a 1.2 within minutes of each other this morning. It just goes to show you when the plates move, they move. And it's earthquake activity like this that is definitely a little concerning. Even though they're small events, it's right there on the locked area of the San Andreas Fault. This specific segment right here, I don't know if it's an 1812 or 1857 earthquake area of the San Andreas Fault. Pretty big earthquakes back then. But this, specifically the southern segment here, over 300 years since a decent rupture. And that's got to be getting close here to popping. I hate using that word, but that's the best way I can describe it here. Nothing above 2.5. Well, let's see that 3.2 from yesterday outside of Ridgecrest. That came in late last night. Aside from that, generally small microquake activity out here. No major swarming going on there for now. This is, on any given day, we can see this number of earthquakes there across Southern California, 26 of them. The majority of the earthquakes that are shown up on the map have to do with the Clear Lake volcanic field up here. That's the geothermal operations there. 46 of them here in the last 24 hours. So we'll continue to keep an eye on Southern California. Northern California looks a little bit more specifically active here today. Western Nevada, a couple different regions out here showing some activity, but it's got a lot of strain out here along the west coast. So we're going to see elevated movement inland, away from that plate boundary where strain is building up. Texas oil fields still getting hit out there. This nothing new. 17 earthquakes out there in the Permian Basin region. Yellowstone National Park, nothing going on, but I do want to just double check that real quick. Over here to Yellowstone. We'll get to space weather here in a little bit. There's not a whole lot going on here, folks. I've seen a couple comments here saying, watch Yellowstone. It's going to blow this year. Well, could have fooled me. Unless there's some big conspiracy here, that the seismograph stations are just repeat of previous days of no activity, then, it's pretty quiet, folks. There's not a whole lot going on out there at Yellowstone. If we're looking at even close to getting to an impending eruption, we would see 5s and 6s out here in terms of magnitudes repeatedly, and major uplift here of the ground. That's not the case out here. I check this area quite often in terms of GPS displacements, and it's more of a fear-mongering tactic here, with Yellowstone being a super volcano. It depends on how one presents this. I could sit out here and say, all right, folks, we're going to look at the Yellowstone super volcano. Here's a look at these very active seismically graphs here. Look at this magma movement. That's not. I like to point this out. This is specifically wind showing up out there on the elements. And even if you look at the borehole areas, a lot of these are just somewhat offline, or they look a little bit odd look, and there's nothing even showing up on those areas in terms of earthquake activity. So there's nothing at all going on at Yellowstone of any suspicious activity. Seismograph stations out here in general, that one's offline, or GPS stations, I should say, have been going. There's 2019, looking for some recent areas. 2020. There's going to be, let's see what this one is, 2020. I know we have some that are working. Oh, there we go. There's a recent graph. So there's seasonal patterns here of elevated trends, and that normally follows the ground absorption of snow runoff, snow melt, and therefore the ground will swell, right? Obviously, it makes sense. So that's why we see that every season here, these little uptrends here, indicating some seasonal swelling due to the moisture there in the ground. But the overall trend pattern out here specifically, and if this seismograph station here is almost directly in the Yellowstone caldera. You can see it outlined right about here, directly in the middle of it. If we were looking at any type of inflation, this graph wouldn't look like this. This is a downward trend. That's why Yellowstone's been so quiet recently, is because there's nothing going on underneath of it. Obviously, there's still, a magma chamber and all that, but there's no changes noted here. This instrument adjustment right here from 2012, it went way up, right? That's a pattern of, or that's a sign of someone making an instrument adjustment, whether it's an antenna or just a calibration adjustment there. Back in 2000, when was our last really good earthquake swarm? I think it was around this time here, 2015. I think we had a couple months of a bunch of ones, twos, and even some threes involved in earthquake swarm there across Yellowstone. And that was a little pattern of going up here. Little bit. This is the inflation chart. Vertical displacement is the key word right here. And we look at that on any volcano area. Even, using vertical displacement measurements to see the offset or buildup of mountains along the west coast, right? Obviously, if we're looking at elevated areas along the Cascadia subduction zone, and it's trending up like that, we would see the chart. I've shown it a number of times, but Cascadia subduction zone area, the west coast, Oregon Beach area, all going up. And that's how the strain's building up there along the Cascadia because of that pressurization. And that will drop eventually there out on the west coast once the Cascadia goes. But here at Yellowstone National Park super volcano, the trend here is down. There's nothing going on here in terms of any type of inflation since 2015. We're going up a little bit, or maybe slightly, but look at that, downward. Nothing here showing anything that Yellowstone's of any interest. I'm sure it's beautiful up there this time of year, any time of year. I went up there a couple years back and got to visit for the first time in my life. Beautiful scenery, a lot of animals out there, but the traffic is a nightmare. It's like driving in San Francisco on a 2-lane road out here. I'd rather just take a back road through Montana or Wyoming somewhere outside of this area, and I can see the same thing without the heavy congestion there of traffic and foot traffic as well. But, if you haven't seen it, got to get up there at least once, but I'll never go back up there. It's too much of a headache. All right, enough of that. There's nothing going on here across Yellowstone. I want to put to rest any worries or concerns on that. A lot of fear-mongering tactics there. I don't like it. New Madrid seismic zone. Yeah, it's a major player in producing some big earthquakes. Last series of earthquakes was back in 1811, 1812. 2.4 on that New Madrid zone here today. Nothing big. It has been seismically more active, though, than previous years in terms of the multitude of counts out here. So that could mean, things are straining more out here. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're due for, another big series of events out here, which is Well, it's been over 200 years now. 1811, 1812. It sits right out there. Look at that. This is the major seismically active New Madrid seismic zone that's will produce ultimately some big earthquakes again in the future. Now, whether there's enough strain to built up there right now, who knows? But it is active. Nothing going on across the eastern portion of the country. The big island of Hawaii. Let's see what's going on out there on the Kilauea volcano from a visual perspective here from the summit cam. Still going. Look at that. What is this, day number 3 or 4? Is it 93 degrees out there? That's got to be close to the heat and whatnot of everything going on here at the Lava Lake area. Crater Lake, or Lava Lake, they call it. So still some fountaining going on from, looks like 2 separate regions here. See if I can spit this out. Nothing changing. I mean, it looks like what it did last night and the last couple days here. So let's see what we got for the latest information, which was put out today on Kilauea Volcano. It's sitting at a watch and orange level. The summit eruption at Kilauea Volcano that began back on January 23rd entered its 4th eruptive episode on January 15th. So it's been going on for 3 days now and continues as of Saturday morning. All activity remains confined within the summit caldera. No unusual activity has been noted along the East Rift Zone or the Southwest Rift Zone, and that's what I like to look forward or like to look to see if there's any elevated signs out here. Maybe this is turning into a bigger than just a localized event up there, but I don't see anything of noteworthy change here across the summit regions. No elevated earthquake activity. If we were looking at something bigger happening here soon, we would see this continue or get worse in terms of the fountaining or further fissure activity opening up with a further broad-scale escalation of deformation here and earthquake activity around the region, but we're not seeing that. It's just a free flow of magma across the air, a free flow of magma from below up to the surface area to create those lava fountaining events that we're seeing right now, and it may continue for a little while. The deformation data chart, here's the past week. That's when it kicked up there on the 15th after a little pause, going down. Here's the past month of inflation going down as expected. Now, if this was continuing to go up and up and up while we're still seeing the fountaining, then obviously we could be looking at something bigger going on, but it's just not. The gradual trend out here has been going up throughout the year, but that could go down here a little bit. It is going down. Almost the previous level. Actually, it looks like we're below that from back in December. But I'd give it I think we're going to see it a couple more days here. Maybe it might even end by today, looking at the past 5 years, just in terms of the deflation drop. May see that end tonight. We'll see. All right, what else we got? One earthquake back prior to the subduction zone here along the Aleutian Trench just after midnight. Little 3.3. Watch that area. I've been kind of chatting about this a little bit here. This whole area can see some big earthquake activity. Obviously, a 9-pointer up in Anchorage. Can't remember the exact year, but there's a little bit of seismically dead zone in terms of gaps from historical data here in this area. So it's possible we could see some larger activity within this region of the Aleutian Trench, and that is just prior to the subduction zone, indicating potential lockage there, strain buildup. Let's take a look at the rest of the globe here, see what we have. Let's see, typical movement out there across the Mediterranean. 4-pointer out here, just on the plate boundary, nothing big. Iceland area, yeah, they've been pretty active out here recently. I believe all that's got to do with the tectonic forces out there. Of course, when that takes place in Iceland, it's a rift boundary. It can enhance the volcano activity out here. Right now, got some further escalation going on northeast here of Grindavik, This is where a lot of volcanic activity has taken place here over the past year. Svartsengi power plant, Blue Lagoon. This is way off here across a separate region. No major change being noted here, just a little earthquake swarming. And this has been kind of a pattern here over the last week of elevated seismic activity here up north around the Bardbunga region. Just an overall pattern here of the tectonic forces pulling apart. And of course, when that takes place, we could see escalated volcanic activity. But right now, I'm not seeing anything of anything major going on. I'm going to check out the Svartsengi area down here in terms of inflation. Here's our last eruption, which ended back in early November time period, I believe, around the Blue Lagoon area and the Svartsengi power plant there in Iceland. That is going up here in terms of inflation, but it looks a little bit slower this time compared to the last previous pause in the eruption, but it's still going up nonetheless. Again, this is the vertical displacement chart here indicating inflation across the region. Let's see here. Nothing major going on there across New Zealand. Looks like a little bit of 3.0 earthquake activity. North Island northward here, but nothing spectacular going on. So we'll keep an eye on our areas of watch out there in the Nankai Trough region. There's even a 3.9 here last night or early this morning. Still got to keep an eye here on this section for some mega quake activity. All right, let's check out space weather activity, see if anything's going on here. Still got somewhat of an elevated flare threat out here, 25% chance for the X flare. M flare at 70, proton event up around 10% as well due to potential protons being shot off here at the speed of light. Let's see what we got. 3664, right? 3964. That's weird. 3664. I remember that a few cycles back. But this is an area that's grown up here pretty quickly. But today, looks like that's going through some type of morphing stage. Not a whole lot of complexity here. I mean, it's still fairly complex out of all the visible ones that I see here on the Earth-facing side of the sun. Still got to watch that area maybe for some M flare and X flare activity. This region, even though it's massive, has a clear-cut core. Not a whole lot of complexity within this region or pretty much any of these other areas. Obviously, we could still see some C flare activity from these regions, but main area of interest is 3964 right now, as that still shows that it's growing, but it's kind of morphing and dwindling, and then it'll come back up. Either way, we'll keep an eye there on 3964. It's got a beta gamma structure, magnetically complex there. No major roars in the forecast there for now, folks. And as you can see, the flare chart here has died off a little bit since yesterday. A lot of M flare activity from 3964. That little sunspot I was showing you guys. Still sizzling here a little bit, still crackling and popping with some C flare activity indicating complexity. So we still got that somewhat of a threat for X flare activity. Severe weather activity today, just a marginal risk there across areas of Florida. Got a 2% chance there for some tornado activity. A little bit of wind, not a whole lot of hail threat, just some tornado activity there and wind. Very minimal risk though today. Here comes the cold air. I wish that was coming out here across the west coast, but it's not happening. I'd rather have it cold because it's supposed to be cold in the wintertime, right? But anyway, a lot of cold, drier air coming down here for the majority of the country. We're talking about temperatures well below normal. Check out this temperature anomaly map showing some areas 28 to 30 degrees below average. That's not 30 degrees below zero, just 30 degrees below the average temperature for this time of year. And that will get replaced here, looks like, with a little bit of warmer air, but then there's another colder air pattern behind that. Look at this as we head into the end of next week. That's when we could see a lot of snow down here across this area. Let me bring back up the precipitation map. So this is for tomorrow. As we put this into motion here, here's our potential winter storm down here across southern Texas, Louisiana. The Gulf Coast could be getting some ice and snow down there. Goodness, that's crazy, but it's wintertime. At least they're getting a winter. I wish I could say the same thing for the West Coast out here, but it's just not happening. Maybe, I don't know. I don't see any significant weather pattern out here, but might see a little change in the overall pattern as we end the month of January, head into the first week of February here for the West Coast. We need some rainfall out here. It's been abnormally dry out here. We're starting to sip back into the drought here for California. Southern California has been in a major drought here for quite a while. Their fire condition out there for now looks like it's. Let's see what we got. The Eden fire is getting good progress on the containment. 73% containment. No hot spots there being observed. Same for the Palisades fire, big one across the Malibu area, and a lot of devastation and damage out there to that community here recently. 43% containment, 23,713 acres burned. No hot spots there being observed out there. No fire conditions that I can see. There may be some smoldering areas, but as far as any satellite detected hot spots, well, it's looking good in terms of this thing hopefully being 100% contained here pretty soon. There's still evacuation orders up, it looks like, across the area just in case things get back out of control. All right, we got 1.6 out in near the Warm Springs, Nevada area. Live look at the seismograph stations for now show quiet conditions. Little earthquake there on Petrolia, but nothing big. Looks like a little distant from that station. Either way, folks, enjoy your Saturday. Another boring day out here in California in terms of weather. It's sunny and it's like, I think it's going to be 65 degrees today. You know, and I think most people can agree that, hey, that's a nice day. Sunny, no wind, 65 degrees. But it's wintertime. We're not supposed to have dry surface conditions out here. It's not good. We need the rainfall. So I don't know who's in charge of producing the rain out here, but if they're listening, boy, could you change the tune out here? Let's change the station. I'm tired of the old dry conditions. Bring us some rainfall. All right, folks, have a good one. Stay safe out there, and we'll be back here throughout the afternoon, just kind of keeping an eye on things. Take care.